by social pain, but they're that concept, which is a neuroscientific theory. Well, actually, it's not a theory. There's a lot of evidence behind it, which I'll talk about briefly. It's not, we don't talk about this stuff in this way. And the reason that we are doing that, there's a number of reasons, but one of the main ones is that we use emotion very overtly in our business. And there are some skeptics out there, and we love a skeptic, by the way. It's a great debate and challenge and discussion. There's a lot of skeptics out there that would call this stuff pink and fluffy. Actually, this stuff is the most challenging, feels the most difficult stuff to do. And with the neuroscientific evidence around social pain and how it is experienced in exactly the same way as physical pain, the same part of the brain, the anterior cingulate, lights up when we are in physical pain and when we're in social pain, so feelings of isolation, exclusion, disconnection, as the words I've just mentioned, is helping some of the clients that we work with, the skeptics, to see that this is a real thing. And when people, are not feeling great, feeling low because they haven't got the relationships they would like with people in the business. And, a lot of relationships in business are very significant to us. They impact our career. We spend a lot of time at work. Actually, in our slides, I think it's on average, we spend 26 years of our lives at work, not just 26 years working, but actually in the office. So it's a significant period of time that we are at work. So when we are feeling social pain in the workplace, it's killing a lot of people, basically, sometimes quite literally, because it is taking people to a very low vibe place. People are feeling very low. Depression is predicted to be the biggest health problem in the world by 2030. And of course, there's other factors that contribute to that. But by not addressing the issues around emotion and social pain in business, we're not helping ourselves, and we're not helping business performance at all. So that was in a nutshell what we talked about. And at Rising Vibe, we help our clients to define or refine their current culture to enable it to be more social pain free. So we talk about the SPF culture. It would be impossible to have a completely social pain free culture, but we love to live in utopia. And actually, just by enabling and creating environments where people feel safe to be honest about how they're feeling, feel able to talk about what they really need to feel more motivated and supported and therefore perform better, you are starting to remove some of the social pain that might be in place actually in your organization. And we've had quite a lot of feedback where people go, oh my God, this really resonates. I see this, I feel this. And some other clients are saying, well, actually, I don't think we've got much social pain. What we know to be true is social pain is usually covert until it becomes a massive issue, and then it's out there. And there are a lot of grievances, disciplinaries, people leaving, people going off with work-related stress because they are not talking about how they're feeling, expressing their social pain until it's too late. And what I mean by too late is it gets to the point, it's a tipping point, and then things like grievances and people leaving and feeling stressed and going off work, absenteeism, presenteeism start happening. And what we are really passionate about is how can you create a culture in your business where it is preventing that from happening. And we don't think it's as complicated as it may sound. And that's what we talked about in a nutshell. And because we didn't have much time for Q&A, and there were lots of questions that were on the Q&A that we didn't get around to, we thought, right, let's pick up another webinar just to answer some of the questions, well, all of the questions if we can that came up, which Jeanette has captured for us. She's also got some polls for us to do as we go through this. So I don't know if there's many of us on the call live, actually, not a huge amount. So it might be a bit of a weak poll, but we'll get a sense anyway of maybe what you are experiencing in your business right now as well. So we're going to answer those questions today. And we thought it would be good to get people on live to do some in the moment stuff as well. But like I said, there's not many people on because of what's going on around coronavirus. So on that subject, talking about emotion and social pain, whether or not you are yourself afraid, have some fear around actually catching it. I don't actually, but I do have a fear around my dad catching it because he's got underlying health issues, for example. I have it's not a fear, so I'm not in fear, but I'm certainly in a bit of worry about the impact on the economy from my perspective. And what I know already, just this week actually, we've had clients who we work globally who are not allowed to travel now. Offices are being closed, people being asked to self-isolate or work from home so they don't have to get into a self-isolation situation. So we've had work cancelled, work postponed. We've had a lot of calls with potential clients who are very interested in the work that we do. Actually, quite a few of them on the back of the webinar that we did have had to push our calls back a month because they're in crisis talks around coronavirus. So already just talking about, some people are actually afraid of catching this and getting ill, or people close to them getting ill. I have some fear around my dad getting it, like I said. And there's others of us who might just have some fear, concern, worry, anxiety, despair, whatever it might be, depending where you're at, around the impact on the economy, on business, especially small businesses. So this is emotional already. You know, people are feeling low vibe as we talk about it because of the coronavirus, a number of reasons. And then, you know, I talked about isolation being a, you know, one of the things that we would use to describe social pain, and the number of people that are being asked to work from home now. And for some people, and for some of our clients, they're kind of going, lovely, I don't have to do the commute, won't it be great? But actually, if this becomes a prolonged situation, it might not feel so great, because working remotely causes a lot of social pain for people. You know, that sense of being alone, number one, which is very obvious, but also, you know, feeling disconnected from people that usually speak to you all the time, a sense of not knowing what's going on in the business, what's going on, where do I stand, what's really happening, am I hearing everything that needs to happen? Because we know when you're in an office, there's a buzz that, you know, a lot of rumors, by the way, not always helpful, but that sense of disconnection, isolation could really ramp up now because of what's going on. So the reason I'm referencing Corona is, you know, it's a big deal. It's driving a lot of low vibe emotion for a lot of people. And it will accentuate, exacerbate, magnify some of the social pain that we talk about already. So, you know, just silo working, poor communication, that the gap between leadership and the wider organisation, just by not physically being together, that's going to have an impact. Although what we do know to be true, and there's a lot of evidence of this, is that you can be in the same office as somebody every single day and still experience social pain because you haven't got the connection that you desire. So I think that was all of the framing I wanted to give to this. A bit of a reminder of what we talked about last week, what social pain is, what an SPF culture is from our perspective, the kind of problems that we solve, and how the coronavirus is impacting generally, but is very relevant in context of social pain. So I know Jeanette has captured all the questions from the last one. So how should we do this? Do you want to just ask me some of the questions? And of course, I'd love your view as well, if you've got anything to add to my view. Add or disagree with, by the way, because we love a debate discussion, because I'm sure there'd be some stuff that we might have a slightly different angle on.
Okay, so shall I start throwing at them?
Yeah, throw them at me.
So there were a few questions kind of in general about social pain and people trying to understand it a little bit more. So the first one is, like, in your experience, is it common for most people to just ignore when they're in social pain in a way that we might not or cannot when we're in physical pain?
I would say absolutely, because there's a number of things. So the first thing that comes up for me when I think about that question is, some people don't, you know, unless you talk about it in this way, wouldn't even know it's social pain. But I think social pain in business has become normal. So I don't get on with X, I don't connect with Y, I don't think Z values me, I don't really want to invite Tom to the meeting, I don't want to go into work this morning because I've got a meeting or got to present and I'm nervous about it. I think that kind of stuff, and what you think, Jeanette, is very common in business. And I think what we're doing by talking about it in this way is highlighting that, yeah, it might be normal, but normal's not the right word. Normal is the right word. Just because it happens all the time, it doesn't mean we shouldn't challenge it. So I think there are people who are just ignoring it, but would not know they're ignoring the social pain. They feel crap, but they've kind of generally become used to feeling crap, or, well, I felt like this once before, so it just must be the way it is. And of course, chronic physical pain is impossible to ignore, because it's kind of, if you've got even just a really bad headache, right, you actually can't focus. If you are feeling really disconnected, you probably will also struggle to focus, but it won't be so obvious. But the fact that we now know it is experienced in the brain in exactly the same way, and we think about how exhausted we feel when we're in physical pain, especially if it's ongoing, and there are people feeling just as exhausted in social pain, but probably won't even address it until it gets really bad. As I said at the beginning, this raise a grievance or disciplinary, because it's almost become expected. And you think about some of the stuff we hear with our clients, which is, I've just been told to get on with it. You know, I'm paid a lot of money, I'm a leader, I've just got to make the decision, I've got to get over it, I've got to be motivated, I've got to be positive. That is normal, which means I think we do ignore it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think in terms of it's become normal, we're also taught to ignore it, aren't you? In terms of what you just said then, just get over it, just forget it, just get on with it, just bury it.
Yeah, absolutely. If someone came in, someone broke their ankle and they couldn't get up off the floor, you wouldn't say to them, but you just need to ignore that. I'm not taking to A&E, I haven't got the time, just get on with it, you paid a lot of money. But of course it happens. So I think, you know, step one of this, which is what we're starting to do for sure, is raising awareness around it so that people recognize, you know, it will happen all the time because we're human beings and we're hardwired for connection. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't address it.
Yeah. So this question kind of follows on from that. Is like, someone's asking, to what extent do you think there's a link between social pain and burnout?
Oh, I think I think the link is, I mean, there has to be a link. So I talked briefly last time, and you've done more research on this, Jeanette, than I have. So when we're in physical pain, right, we will release cortisol, right? The immune system needs to kick in, and what we've discovered, we haven't discovered it. Let's not pretend we discovered it, but what neuroscientists have discovered is that exactly the same thing happens. Cortisol, immune system kicks in, you know, inflammation from social pain. All right, we need to protect the body. If you think about that, and I'm someone who's had very severe adrenal fatigue in 2012, very severe, because I was constantly feeling anxious, but not exploring it, not working with it. As well as that, I was very driven to achieve results. I had some stuff going on in my personal life that was very, very deep in social pain. Now I think back to that. So I was literally firing adrenaline, cortisol, my body clearly trying to protect itself all the time. That fight, flight, freeze thing going on. Of course you're going to burn out. I mean, that's the only way it can go, actually. It is that way.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting. So when you talk about examples of social pain and when you see it, you use words as isolation and exclusion. And last time in the webinar, someone asked, what is the difference? And can you give an example of the difference between isolation and exclusion?
Okay, so I think this will be potentially different for different people. So there'll be dictionary definitions of this, right, that you could Google, and actually it might, you know, they might come up. Is it cinnamons? Cinnamons isn't the right word.
It's not cinnamons.
You know what I mean? What is it called?
Cinnamon. I can't say it either, but I know the word.
Clearly we know about social pain, but we don't know about some English words to describe things. But when you go, you know, oh, I want a different word for that, I'm gonna check this on words. They might come up potentially as the same thing. My and our definition of that is isolation is, so for example, remote working. Let's take that as a very obvious one. I am isolated. I feel isolated. I am not with people. I am alone. So the whole self-isolation thing, you know, I have to keep myself to myself. Now, for some people, you know, picking up the phone, doing a Zoom, it is enough for them. For other people, not so much. So for me, isolation is more about a circumstance. Exclusion for me is you are not invited. I am not asking you to join this. You have asked to join, and I've said, no, you're not welcome. I might not say, no, not welcome, but I might say, no, this doesn't involve you. There's a lot of people we work with, as you know, Jeanette, that will say, you know, this piece of work or this project massively impacts my results and my outcome, but they're not involving me. You know, the silo working would be an example of where people would feel excluded. Hang on a minute, why are they not talking to me about that? Because that impacts my project, my business, my result, my role. So that's how I would differentiate, really simply, that it's isolation is more of a matter of circumstance. You are removed. Now, of course, you can isolate yourself, right? You could be in an office full of people, but sit and not get involved, not go first, not have conversations, not put yourself out there. It might feel too difficult. It might feel too vulnerable. So you can self-isolate in a room full of people, right? And we know people are very, very low vibe will do that, because having to do social interaction when you're very, very low vibe is difficult. So you can self-isolate, but it's almost either a choice in that way, though it doesn't feel like a choice to people, or a situation of circumstance, where exclusion for me is a little bit more deliberate. Even though the person who is excluding someone might be completely unaware that they are behaving in a way that is impacting that person in that way. So I'm not saying it's always deliberate, by the way. Sometimes it probably is. So I don't know if that answers the question for you, Jeanette, because you didn't answer it, but I've never answered that question before. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, in total sense. It almost feels a little bit like being excluded is the act and the isolation is the feeling that happens once you've been excluded, but they are very similar, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
So then we're moving on to the topic of leadership and like leaders as role models of this stuff. So the first question is really interesting. It came from Paul around what's the impact of passive versus proactive leadership on teams and then individuals, and on social pain and emotional health that's felt in business. And his definition of passive leadership is those leaders that say, my door is always open, come and see me. So they basically will sit back and they'll only address social pain issues if people come to them, versus a proactive leader that goes out and proactively does stuff to reduce social pain in their business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So my answer to that would be, I think you would, maybe sometimes you'll get leaders that sit in more of one of those camps than the others, right? I think we would probably, anyone who's had a leader with more would resonate with, they're more passive or they're more proactive. I guess the bit for me that's come to me when you asked me that question is, what is the responsibility of everybody else? And what I mean by that is, so for example, I'm going to use me as an example, and you can challenge me on this, Jeanette, for sure. I would say that my door is always open, even though we don't work in office together. We work remotely, as we come together, but we work remotely. And I would like to think that because we have the conversations we have, you would believe that to be true, and the team would believe that to be true. So if they had a problem, I'm not saying, this might be true for everybody, 10 out of 10, because it depends on how much we interact, the relationship we have, how they feel about them, how they, all that stuff. But I mean it when I say my door is open. Whereas I think some people say my door is always open because it's a thing to say, but their body language and the way that they show up, it isn't actually open. So I think there's two parts of passive. There is it really passive? I'm genuinely saying it's open, but you have to come to me, because I won't know if you really have got an issue or not. I can only take responsibility for my part in that. But it does need to be coupled with the proactive bit, which is also going out and having conversations. So I think if you do enough proactivity in terms of, as we do, what are your needs? What support do you need from me to help you feel motivated and supported and do your job to the best of your ability, to feel cared about? And someone says, oh, actually, no, I'm fine. There's nothing else I can do about that, even if I was like uber proactive. Whereas if I'm proactive, but then also sit in the passive space where I go, you know where I am, we'll check in once a month, but my door's always open. If people feel safe and they own their part in that, they will still come to someone and say, actually, we spoke 3 weeks ago. I know we're not due to speak for another week, but actually, could I pick up with you? So I think, I don't know if that made any sense, by the way, because I was rambling that out as I was thinking about it. There is definitely a responsibility on any leader to think about, how am I supporting a sense of safety, which ultimately is what, removing social pain is about, that people can come to me at any time. So I'll need to be proactive, but actually it's not all on me to be proactive. How you doing? Do you need anything? How do you do anything? Do you need anything more from me? How are you getting on? There needs to be regular check-ins, 100%. But it's also the rest of the organization's responsibility to take their part in that and come forward and say if they're not getting what they need. But we know that is a real challenge for people, because challenging hierarchy does not feel comfortable for most of the working population.
So in summary, I think what I take from your response there is it needs to be a balance of both. You need proactivity, but you need the passiveness as well, because it's down to the others to be accountable for talking about how they feel and being honest about it.
Yeah, and I think, passive is an interesting word. If you were just truly passive, and I guess there's kind of camps with this. You could be someone who, as I've just explained, you go, come to me for anything, but you don't really mean it. And then there might be the people who are just genuinely passive, who just go, yeah, well, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to take any action. For me, passive is going, I'm just going to sit back and do nothing. I mean, that's my interpretation of it. Which actually, whether you're a leader or whether you're starting off as a graduate in your career, passive is never going to be helpful. It's never going to be helpful. So I think it's more about everybody taking responsibility for having the conversations around this stuff, as we do, around the scale, in context of needs, the 6 C's, and both parties, all parties, have responsibility, a part to play.
Yeah, nice. So you mentioned just now, you alluded to the fact of you leading a team that is remote. So there's a question about, what advice do you give to leaders where they're not physically present? So either in matrix organisations or remote organisations where they don't physically see their team on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I guess there's so much technology now, and I'm not, I'm rubbish with technology. It took me ages to start to use a bloody iPad, because I was like, well, that's a bit scary. It's not something that comes naturally to me, but there's so much stuff out there now that is easy. Even people like me who don't enjoy it actually can use it. So as you know, we use Zoom all the time, and we are really good about our Monday 1 p.m. Zoom call. And sometimes it's very structured. We need to talk about something specific. We might just talk through our roadmap. Sometimes it's just how we're getting on, what's going on, how people are feeling. If we know something's happened or someone's got something going on, we'll talk about that. It's really not difficult to do that. But I think the one-to-one interactions are also important, and making sure that, depending on the size of your team, that someone has somebody that they regularly check in with on a one-to-one. Either, if you're not going to see them that week, on via a Zoom or on the phone, depends on, what works for both of you. Or if you're going to see someone face to face, just having conversations like we all do about what's going on at home and how you're doing, and as well as business. I think, to a greater or lesser extent, some people don't want to talk about their private life, and that's absolutely fine. But they might want to have a conversation with you about how they're feeling about a piece of work. I think it's allowing the formal and the informal, whether that is you are going to see them, make sure you make some space for that. We're lucky when we meet up, we're usually traveling on a train for a bit, so we get loads of opportunities to do that. And if we don't, making sure you have a phone call or you do a Zoom call once a week, even if just for half an hour, to say, look, I know really busy this week, anything you need, anything urgent that you're struggling with or you need support with. And at least making sure everybody has someone that they can connect with on a regular basis. I mean, it's bloody obvious. I feel like I'm just sort of stating the obvious, but what we know to be true is a lot of people don't do it. But what I also know is, we talk about this stuff, we do this for a living. What I also know is when we have got a lot of stuff going on, when there's lots of stuff to think about, when pressure's on, we do, all of us, when we go lower vibe, become more inwardly focused in a, what is it that I need? How am I feeling? And we might not look out as much as we might normally. And, we've just been talking about this week, about the coronavirus and how it's impacted. I've got a lot of that going on in my head going, right, there's things been moved, things been pushed back, cancelled, postponed. I'm very much in my head around that at the moment. So I probably haven't this week thought about checking in with everybody in the way that I might normally. So I think it's about going, we're all human. We need to keep on our radar. But I guess the difference is I'm aware of that. Whereas I think a lot of people in business are not challenged to be aware of that kind of thing. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, people get into the hamster wheel, don't they? And this really links to actually the next, it's not so much a question, it was a reflection that somebody sent in after the webinar. And their reflection is that leaders seem to want to strategize through issues rather than deal with the messiness of social pain. And I think that almost links to what you're just talking about, that, you know, we kind of focus on the day-to-day and the getting stuff done and the focusing on the tasks, head down in the sand almost, rather than thinking about social pain and emotions and how, you know, how people are doing.
Yeah. And so let's take the coronavirus, right? Because it's very bloody topical. And we'll talk about this on our call on Monday. So I think there's talking about what's the thing that's going on, what is our strategy to address it, cope with it, manage it, because in business we have to have one. And then the bit that is usually missing is, and how do we all feel about that? And that is where, you know, the scale is so powerful for that. And I'm sure there's other tools out there, by the way, but clearly we're going to think ours is the best one. You know, to say coronavirus, this is the situation, this is the impact it's having on our business right now. This is the initial thinking, plan, suggestion, strategy to address it, right? And everybody needs a bit of that. You don't want any leader just going, oh my God, I don't know what to do. That would not be helpful. So the strategy bit is definitely important. But then the bit that is as important is, and how are we feeling about that? And we know that just by having the scale on the table and saying, where are we all? In context of what we just talked about, where is everybody on the scale? Okay, talk to me about, you know, what is driving those feelings? What thoughts are you having? What beliefs do you have? It's really as simple as that, as we know, because we've seen the transformation in a room in probably an hour when that happens. But it's the bit that falls off because it feels pink and fluffy, or it doesn't feel important enough, or the person leading is uncomfortable with emotion, or the person leading is uncomfortable with how low vibe they feel about it and they don't want to self-disclose that because that feels too vulnerable. Or there'll be lots of other reasons, but absolutely the default for leadership, and let's be honest, you know, things are starting to change as we've seen, but who is taught leadership? Let's talk about emotional intelligence, which is, you know, a bit of a buzzword when you get underneath what it really means. Who goes to any kind of leadership training that's just talking about how are you going to learn to be open and honest about how you're feeling, manage that, and support your team to do the same. Just standalone doesn't happen. I mean, it does with us, but it's more about strategy and all that kind of thing.
So really leading on for that, there was a comment that a lot of leaders, and particularly senior leaders, seem to be poor around this stuff and around that aspect. So do you have any guidance for assessing leaders in terms of their ability to be good role models and to be able to effectively lead cultural change?
Yeah, we do. We have some brilliant tools to evaluate that. And the most important thing, which is the biggest challenge we face, as you know, is finding leaders who want to be assessed in that way. Because actually, there are ways of assessing it from afar. We know that too. But what is the point of assessing something from afar if the situation, person, team that you're assessing isn't really going to engage in doing anything differently? That is the biggest challenge. We've got brilliant tools and ways of doing that. And when we work with clients who go, and we've got a few of them, as you know, that are brilliant, that partner us and go, this is really bloody uncomfortable, but we really want to know how we're doing at this stuff. We want to know, we want to hear it. We want to learn from the wider organization. We want to hold them to account too and challenge them in terms of their part in this. Let's assess us, because we want to change, because we recognize there is a problem to solve here. The challenge is there's a lot of leaders that don't believe there's a problem to solve in this area, because the way they have led all their lives has served them well so far. And we had a conversation with a client on Wednesday, as you know, Jeanette, because you're with me, about, and I think this is getting a little bit better, but actually I still don't think it's changing quickly enough. And this isn't just leaders, but people in businesses who are achieving results, but leaving dead bodies behind. And they're not being challenged around the fact they're leaving dead bodies behind. They're simply being rewarded for achieving the results. And until that is more on the radar, in my opinion, it's going to take longer to really get this stuff on the radar. Until we start measuring and there be implications to not doing it and rewards for doing it, this kind of thing, it's not going to change. And we know we've got some clients who are absolutely putting this on the radar. So assessment, absolutely. Assessment is quite easy to do. But if the situation or the individual or the team that you're assessing is really not engaged because they don't see it as an issue and they really don't think there's a problem to solve, there's actually no point wasting your money doing it.
So you talked just now about some examples of clients where you've seen the leaders really open up to this stuff. What impact does it have when they are already open to it?
Well, and I was with one just yesterday. The culture is really simple terms. One where people say what they mean, say what they need, and go first. And the impact of that, so even if you just take those three things, right? Whether you talk about business or in a group of friends or I know people are going to say what they mean. I know people are going to be honest about where they're at. And I know that people in this place, there are many people that are prepared to go first with the conversation, with addressing something, with being honest about something, with transparency about something. There is not, for me, when I just hear that, anything that feels safer. Even if the information or the data or the feedback is not particularly positive, the fact that I know we're going to know, and I know people are going to talk about how they're feeling, culturally, it is mind-blowing. People feel safe, so they talk about things they need to understand. They talk about needing clarity. They will challenge if they don't agree with something. They will put forward an idea because they don't have that severe fear of rejection that a lot of people have around putting forward an idea or speaking up in a meeting, which completely curbs innovation and creativity. I mean, I could bang on about this for hours, as you know. The list is endless. And what we've got with a couple of our clients, two clients for sure that have at every single level of the business and in pocket. So you know, being absolutely realistic about this and transparent. Not every single individual is totally embrace this and living and breathing it every day, but the majority are. And so what is happening is the people that are not embracing it are the outsiders. So they either get stuck in or they'll end up moving on, which is the right thing, right? If you want to really shift a culture, you only want people in it that will engage in it. So, you know, hitting the exec, the senior management team, you know, the next level down, the wider operation or service, and having people and ambassadors out there who are living and breathing it and know they have permission to hold everybody to account. That is where the big shift comes. As you know, we talk about what is expected and then what is accepted. And where it really works, where you have senior buy-in, is when they are holding people to account and giving permission for the wider organization to hold people to account when what is expected is not showing up.
Yeah, and I think up until now we've been talking about leaders and senior leaders role modeling it, and as we've had conversations with some of our clients recently around we are all, every person in the business is responsible for culture depending on how we behave and how we show up. So in that kind of line of encouraging and role modeling this stuff, what advice do you have on that in terms of how how it's not just the senior leaders' responsibilities? What part do we all play in that?
Well, you know, the great Gandhi quote, be the change that you want to see. If we are expecting someone else to go first before we do anything, can you imagine if we all are in that space, nothing's going to change. And there's a lot of people out there who won't do it because, you know, I'm not putting my head above the parapet. It's too risky. Well, if that's the case, stop moaning about it. Take action or don't mention it. I mean, basically, that's my advice. And if you don't know how to take action, you're not sure what you need to do or how you need to do it, ask for support. Ask for a way of doing that, whether that's to a peer, whether it's outside the business, whether you've got some, you know, the kind of culture that supports that. And actually, as you know, I say all the time, someone will say, okay, what if I do it? And I, you know, my card is marked. What if I do it and, you know, it impacts my career? My response every time is, why on earth would you want to work somewhere like that? So, you know, I'm not saying that in a flippant way either, but actually, if you really don't feel able to play your part in something and you just want to talk about it like it's outside of you, well, they won't change and the culture's this and it's not working, but you actually have not taken any action to try to rectify that. And the reason genuinely is not because you are passive and stuck in kind of maybe persecutor or victim, quite like moaning about everybody else. If the facts are you actually do want to make a difference, but you're just afraid to, and you do it, and the response you get is the response that people are most afraid of, which, by the way, I don't think has ever happened in my experience. But if that was the case, then actually you know the situation, you've got a great choice to make. You've got an informed choice to make. No one would want to work somewhere like that. And just shying away from it is not going to help either. So as with all the work that we do, and this is a bit of a bugbear of mine, I'll try not to rant now. You can learn loads of theory about giving feedback, about holding people to account, around having conversations that feel difficult, around all of that stuff. You can get certificates just from attending a course, but you've got to you've got to go back and take some action. You've got to go back and take action. You know, we've been talking a lot in our business, you know, about business development and all that kind of stuff. It can feel really uncomfortable for people, and you can learn and you can read and you can consume loads of information, but until you take action, nothing's going to change, nothing's going to happen. That's my answer. I don't know if that answers the question. I've kind of forgotten what the question was now. I've got on a bit of a rant.
I think it answered the question. I can't remember exactly what the question was either. But, so kind of on that line, we talked about, I think at the webinar, it came up around the concept of boundaries and setting boundaries. So this is in the view of, for those people in organisations that are the role models, that are the change makers, how can we encourage our colleagues to kind of join the club, I suppose, and set the boundaries? So don't always be online, don't say yes to everything, you know, don't work really long hours, those kind of things, because that's the thing that impacts the culture if we're all doing it. So how can we, if we're not doing it, how can we encourage our colleagues to join us in that?
I mean, I think this is quite a complicated one because it sounds really straightforward, but actually it's about getting underneath what is stopping someone doing that. If you think about where we were this week, you know, we finished a program and people were sharing their learning, and boundaries came up with that, you know, in terms of saying yes to everything, working till 1 o'clock in the morning, that kind of thing. Even when, so let's imagine, you know, you've got a leader, you've got a senior team that's saying, we absolutely do not want you to be working late, working long hours, etc., etc. If you are doing that, you need to tell us so we can talk to you about what that's about. Is it you genuinely have too much work? That's a conversation we need to have, because unless we know that, we can't look at workload. And why would a business bring in more resource if they don't know they need it? You know, why would they bring on the extra cost if they don't know that they need it? Of course they wouldn't. So is it genuinely you've got too much work, or is it something else? And it usually is, right? Which is, I don't want to delegate because I think I do it better, or I don't trust my team. I'm a perfectionist, so actually there's never enough hours in the day. I'm afraid if I say I can't do it all, you'll think I'm a failure, I'm incompetent. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So actually, the only way to, there's two ways, I guess. So the main way to encourage people is to role model it, and just do it yourself. Again, be the change you want. You can't control other people, but you can influence them. And by doing it yourself, you'll influence them. The other bit is to challenge the people around you, your team or your peers, if they're still doing it, and ask them, what's stopping you switching off your laptop at 6? What's stopping you having the weekends off? What's stopping you, whatever it might be, and helping them get underneath the real reason they're not doing it. You know, we know there's a lot of evidence based on the work that we do, that people are staying more digitally connected because they don't feel emotionally connected enough. And I'll use this example again. I use it on the webinar. So, you know, we know that Laura in the team went to Australia at the beginning of the year to see her sister and a baby. And she said, I'm going to log on and look at emails. And I said, I absolutely do not want you to do that. You're on holiday. I do not want you to do that. Now, because we have a great emotional connection and she feels safe, she knew I meant that. Now, it could be someone else that I said that to who doesn't know me so well. We don't have that connection. I might think we do have that connection, but we don't. And I said, I don't want you working over the weekend or on holiday. But they still do, because they didn't quite believe that I meant that. And they don't feel safe enough to be away from the business, not knowing what's going on in case something goes wrong and they get in trouble. Or we can role model it, but we all have to, if we choose to, if it's important enough, if it's a real problem we want to solve, get underneath what's really stopping us being able to put a boundary in. It's a huge subject, this. I mean, we could do a whole bloody webinar series for a year on boundaries. It's saying no is easy, meaning it isn't. So I think that's a really complicated one. Role modeling it though, right? You practice what you preach is going to help and will influence others. And that, of course, will depend on your standing in the business, how much power you have in the business, what you are in the hierarchy. So we always encourage, as you know, the senior leaders to role model those kind of boundaries, or be transparent about it. So you guys know that I will work on a Sunday sometimes, because actually Sunday afternoons, it means I get ahead of the game. I do not expect other people to do that. I absolutely expect, all of us to be utilising and maximising the impact in the business and the value we add in the hours we've got. Of course, we all want that, right, as a team. But just because I work on a Sunday, I don't expect anyone else to do that. And you all know that, I'd like to think. I'm pretty sure you do. So because I send something on a Sunday, I don't expect people to answer it. You've got to be explicit about it. Yeah.
I like that. I think I like the idea of that, challenge it and hold the mirror up to someone and kind of say, what needs to happen in order for you to not do that. I think that's a really effective, because it's about them making it conscious, isn't it? Because a lot of these things are probably patterns.
And that's definitely the biggest thing. We can't control people, can we? We can't. By the way, I've sped up now. I'm like normal time. Everyone must have logged off for lunch, I reckon. Because what we try and do, all of us, even I do this still sometimes unconsciously, even though I talk about this stuff all the time, is we want to make other people do something. We want to be able to control how other people show up and what they do and what they don't do. We can't. We absolutely cannot. And if you're ever lucky enough for someone to kind of conform to the way you wanted them to be, they would have wanted that anyway. They haven't done it because you've wanted them to do it. They would have changed because it was already on their radar. We can influence people, but we can't make people do things differently. They've got to learn to get underneath what might be getting in the way, stopping them.
So interesting on that line of not making people do things. There's a question that's linked to our sub-brand of calling out the men. So the question is, how easy is it to get men to open up about their emotions?
And well, it varies, doesn't it? It varies. So let's just be really clear about the calling out the men sub-brands. The reason we have separated out that calling out the men, I mean, it's the same. Rising Vibe is about cultural change. We're culture consultants, or embedding culture, bringing emotion into culture. The calling out the men sub-brand is exactly the same as that, but we're focusing on providing emotional support for men in business, because there is none. There is absolutely none. And therein lies the answer, I think. That we do not enable the environment. By the way, we sometimes in business is not there for women either, right? But there is much more focus on that for women. There's much more expected from women. As we talked about this week, we're running a female talent program, and what we want to do the next cohort is get more men involved, because otherwise, the programs we do, Rising Vibe is known for emotion. It's like, oh yeah, well, of course the women are on it because it's about emotion. That's not helpful. Men experience exactly the same stuff that we do in terms of how we feel, but they process things differently. So I know men that will absolutely open up and are brilliant and better than some women, and vice versa. But what we know to be true is showing any form of weakness, which will be usually around not being able to cope, not knowing, not understanding, not being good enough, is the biggest shame trigger for men. And that is not encouraged or talked about. So think about imposter syndrome, right? That is really associated with women. I'm working with men all the time who've got that going on, but they don't want to talk about it because it's not encouraged. Whereas there are so many things around imposter for women, but not for men. So I actually believe that we just need to create the environment where we say, your bloody emotions are just as important as women's. And just because you're a man, it doesn't mean you don't feel. But the way that you process your emotions is different. We know they're much more action orientated, problem solving, want to take action, jump in, more impulse. Just talking for men, and I'm generalizing, but we know this the majority to be true, just talking it out for some men actually makes it worse. They need more action taking, which is why we have developed the sub-brand. We're being deliberately provocative, right? We're going, what about the fellas? Because all the stats, all the mental health stuff out there is everywhere, but in business, it's not. So how easy is it? Depends on the environment that you create. Depends on how often you keep showing up with it. It depends how often you reinforce the message that men's emotions are as significant and as important as women's, and they also deserve the space. and the environment to share that. It's about keep showing up. And if you think about it, culturally in business and actually in life, there's not been any consistent, it's getting better, there's not been any consistent stuff around, yeah, men, talk about it. Yeah, men, come on, let's talk about it. Yeah, men, help yourself. Yeah, men, how do you move forward? It's not been that. That's not been there. So that's why I think they found it, as well as the way they are hardwired differently, there's not been the environment yet to help them do more of that. But I have met some men that once you give them the bloody opportunity, are more open than some women I work with. They just need the environment.
Yeah, interesting. So we've got 2 questions left. So this one came from a lady who's a mental health first aid champion in her business. And she said that she's really struggling to work out how she can actually affect change and ease social pain in her business. So her question is, how can we, mental health first aiders, really create a difference in our businesses?
This is an interesting one, and we've had a lot of conversations about this in our business. So as I said in the webinar, and I'll just kind of recap slightly, briefly, Mental Health First Aid is a fantastic initiative. What it's doing is bringing more awareness. What we also know to be true, and I'm being mindful about how I articulate this, but actually I don't really do that. So I'm just going to kind of shoot from the hip here. And I am sounding like I'm generalizing. I'm not. Because I know there will be difference in this. But in our experience, which is why we talked about it as part of this webinar, bloody brilliant initiative. It is really key. And I need to be very clear, we absolutely think it's genius to start getting more of this talked about. But, and it's still a tick box in some places. Some of the people in that mental health first aid role are not the right people. And when I say not the right people, I mean not the most helpful people in a number of ways. One of them, I guess, is I talked about people leaving dead bodies behind. Those people who are leaving dead bodies behind, how engaged are they in the mental health first aid stuff? Probably not at all. Who are the people that need challenging around their impact? Those people. People who work in that way are very rarely connected to that initiative. They're the people that need it. There are some people who are attracted to that mental health first aid role because they like to rescue people. We've experienced it a lot. They're in it, and their belief is that I'm in this because I want to help other people, but they get a huge amount from it. We all get stuff from things, by the way. I don't buy into altruism, as everybody knows. But if you have got someone connected to that role because they want to help people, potentially they could be rescuing them, which isn't helpful. So how can a mental health first aid role really support? By challenging, if you've got that hat on and you've been trained and you are the mental health first aider, go and challenge the people in the organization that are not engaging in it, that need to engage in it. And that isn't necessarily easy for some people. And going back to my original thing about not always the most helpful personality, not all the people attracted to that role are the kind of people that will go up to the senior team or the people that are not engaging and say, oi, what's stopping you getting engaged in this? That would be my answer. Slightly provocative, but I feel very passionate about that.
No, it's good. It's a very interesting point. So final question. I've left the $64 million question to the end.
With 4 minutes to go.
With 4 minutes to go. So this is about impact and return on investment. So if I were to invest in focusing my resource, time, money, effort on social pain and reducing social pain in my business, how would that affect and impact the numbers in my company? So the KPIs, the performance numbers, retention figures, that kind of thing.
Clearly this is a big question, right? We could do a whole webinar series on this. And for anyone who's interested who hears this, we have got our own model, the impact of learning model, that we use to help our clients measure return. Because you cannot put a figure on this type of work. Any learning, you can't say, deliver this culture program and it's going to deliver £654,000 on the bottom line. You can't do it, too many influencing factors. But what you can do is, and we're challenging our clients a lot around this now, because I don't think it's the way that we generally think. What is the problem that you want to solve? How much is that bloody costing your business right now? That if we solved it, we would reduce that cost. That is a way to look at this. So I can think about some of them. Let me think of an example, which is easier to measure, but just because of time. If you have a sales team, and this happens a lot this year, a sales team selling a product or a drug or a service that they used to have exclusive rights to, right? And now they've lost those exclusive rights. Things become harder. And we've worked with quite a lot of sales teams who have gone, hang on a minute, now we've got real competition, not just on, in other areas, what we used to exclusively own. So there was no real competition and we had market share. We haven't got that anymore. The amount of morale, disengagement, people then getting hammered. We know what it's like in sales. People getting hammered because they weren't hitting metrics and KPIs. Classic social pain, right? Hero zero stuff. How is anyone who's in that place going to feel motivated to go and drive more business? They are not. So what we did with one of our clients was talk about, if your sales force continues to drop in terms of engagement and morale and motivation, how much is that going to cost your business? They already had some very clear metrics around how sales had dropped and did an engagement survey and kind of made a correlation. That hooked them in straight away. It is impossible to say, you deliver this, it's going to give you this much return on the bottom line. Impossible. And when I was in the corporate world, that ROI question used to do my head in, which is why actually the impact of learning model started to be devised. If you can really get underneath what is the problem we're trying to solve here, rather than just ramming in a solution without understanding what it is that you're trying to solve, what is that problem? What issues is that problem causing? What is that costing us as a business? And actually, if we were to deliver this, which was to resolve some of this, so people would feel less disconnected, more motivated, less isolated, whatever it might be that the problems are, how would that impact this problem? Therefore, how would that impact eliminating the cost it's currently having to your business? That is a more powerful way to look at it.
Agree. Thanks, Lou. That's all the questions.
And it's 13:29. Can't believe it.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. So, guys, thank you very much. Anyone who is listening live, not many actually. When you get this recording, people probably won't be listening to this or something for a few weeks as we all deal with the coronavirus drama. When you do listen to this, you have any more questions, you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, you want to think about what are the problems really in my business, how much they're costing this business, how can we solve them? We are the people that can help you with that. Please get in touch I'm going to whiz this now really quick before I finish. Go right to the bottom. Probably take a while to come up. But you can email us at hello@rising, there you go, hello@rising-vibe.com. You can follow us on all those platforms. But if you email us, hello@rising-vibe.com, we can get in touch with you and have a chat, check out our website, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, all those kind of things. We're always sticking loads of great content out there, in my opinion anyway. And we would love to hear from you. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. I'm going to see if I can exit now.